you don't have now to go elsewhere, because it's the biggest challenge now is the digital trust. Third-party risk is the emerging biggest danger. So the more you go to other players you don't know who are not covered by your players, the more you increase the supply chain. Offensive. And finally, we did what we call open source intelligence and technical research. Open source intelligence is you are scanning to look for the available, publicly available information. Technical research, we are using our own tools to do the scanning and see what we can get. This was very important, especially at the mapping the ISP level to identify any open ports, which services are running, but also once we get any response from on those ports, then we do a technical protocol to scan any nodes that indicate a response. And that helps us to enumerate and understand the attack surface, but also which items or assets are potentially exposed to the internet. So with that, I will invite my colleague Godfrey. Take it. So as Godfrey comes in, as you can see, we have organized this report in 6 sections. The first is the regional and then the national perspective. So this is giving you a high level of the technical research, what we found at the national level, which assets are exposed. Obviously, any of those assets that are critical, we have not included that information. We will subsequently, after this report, reach out to these people and give them a custom report of the findings. And then we shall give a deep dive into Uganda's state of cybersecurity, where we are looking at the Uganda police report, and then showing the project frontline findings, just for you to get a bigger picture of what cases go to police, and then when we respond to institutions, what cases do we find. So this gives you a very good perspective in terms of how organizations are very concerned about reputation, because many organizations, of course, thrive on trust, and cybersecurity tries almost erodes this trust. And so we are seeing organizations trying maybe not report most of the cases that come. And that perspective is going to help you to see why it is very important to have a very good incident response, because if you don't have very good incident response, if, for example, incident happens and your response time is, say, more than a day, you can imagine the damage that takes place. But also compared to an organization whereby you have real-time response, that is completely different. We shall also look at both internal and external exposure. Most of the time, when we talk about security or cybersecurity, we are looking at obviously the known 3 security elements: confidentiality, integrity, availability, and non-repudiation. When Uganda passed the 3 cybersecurity laws, this means that their email communication, for example, email signature is an accepted way of signing a digital document. So we will be showing you how, when somebody is inside the organization, how the extent of the breach they can cause. We have found there is a lot of poor secrets management and credential management, but then we'll show you why this is the case. You're also going to understand about the top 5 attack vectors, the common vectors which are happening, and why this still happen, despite organizations investing in security, despite them training people. Why are this happening? So we will be able to show you that one. And then, of course, the vulnerabilities and the future of cybersecurity. So Godfrey, are you ready to take? Okay, fantastic. So I will invite Research Officer 1 to give us a regional perspective on the comparative cyber landscape across East African countries. So I want, on behalf of Summit and the HLB, to thank you for making time to attend this event. You're going to learn a lot about cybersecurity, and you better appreciate what police interventions used to take place but also at the tactical level, what your managers need to know to make sure that they improve your digital trust. Thank you. Yes, okay, let me stop sharing and then comes in. Thank you. I think I've stopped. Okay, so you pardon us because of the lag in changing. Okay, are you ready?
Morning once again, everyone. Morning again once, everyone. So as we can see, I hope everyone can see the screen and can hear me clearly. So from our research and background work, we looked at the region in perspective, and to be specific, the East African region. Well, it's quite more than the 4 countries displayed, but we managed to focus on the 4 in question. The reason being is that our rationale is we measured this starting from the attack surface, like how many of the East African countries have an attack surface to begin with. So an attack surface is a composition of ways and capabilities that are available to attackers to cause damage in one or another. So these include the applications and the services within. So from our observation, we notify and rank like Kenya and Tanzania within East Africa. They are the biggest in terms of cyber presence and internet presence. They do house a lot of systems. These include applications and services of different kind. And as you can see, the share is quite big, bigger than Uganda and and Rwanda, sorry. So we measured this according to, for example, the number of IP addresses that are available within the country, then the number of application and services that are running on those IP addresses, then the state of vulnerabilities that we discovered and state of compromise on those systems. That's the methodology we utilized. So moving on forward, we found that within the same address space of the region, Tanzania and Uganda carry the most number of systems that from our telemetry appear compromised and are compromised. They are used to attack other systems around the globe, whereas Kenya comes in third. The reason for this is that Uganda has less attack surface than Kenya, but has more compromised systems, probably because they have more policy and controls in terms of how they deploy systems on the internet. That does help them remediate some of the issues that are not present within Uganda and Tanzania. So as you can see, Tanzania does have a lot of systems that are compromised and are used as avenue to attack other systems around the globe. So the total number of systems in terms of vulnerabilities, if we look at the trend, as you can see around this data spans quite a lot of a bigger time frame. We are looking at from around April in 2018 up to around 2021 and above. But as you can see that the most and the biggest affecting sort of the biggest in terms of exploitability is a CVE, or a vulnerability that is almost 9 years old within the Kenyan space. While in Tanzania, you can see that the most and prevalent vulnerability is like 6 years old. So whereas in Rwanda, we realize that it's the same 6 years old vulnerability, and in Uganda, the same. So what this means is that our patch window in terms of internet presence and organizations is that at most we have 6 years to patch vulnerabilities, because we still have vulnerabilities that as old as 6 and 9 years still affecting systems within the region. So and some of these vulnerabilities have high, and they are ranked and critically high. So
it comes and opens another one. I see someone has asked, how do you measure? We shall answer that question as we move on with the presentation. Thank you very much. Okay. You put on the projection. Enable the slides. Or align. Okay, thank you very much. I see it is not yet seen. Hope it will come. Good. So we just thought to give you a very good context. You have an understanding of what is the state of the problem. If you see the reported loss to Uganda police, 245 cases were reported to the cybercrime cases department, and those led to a loss of around 1.5 billion. That is according to the published cybercrime report by the Uganda Police Force. And the same report indicated that only 337 million and 77 million was recovered. So this means that recovery rate is only 24%, and the most 76% is lost. So obviously, as we are going to show you, this is speaking to the biggest challenge that we find in many of the organizations, where incident response is poor, investigations mechanisms delay. So you find that an incident takes place, there has been poor incident response, there is poor thereafter chain of custody, but most importantly, there is poor preservation of the evidence. That is very important in a way that is forensically sound and admissible. So now, but also this gives the longer response time. If a crime takes place and you spend, for example, 4 hours before you discover, so you are giving the attackers or the criminals a chance to cover their tracks. Now, sometimes, for example, if the cyber criminals, we have found that there is a big increasing insider threat. So many of the times, for example, we find evidences in logs. You are going to find evidences in logs in terms of the network devices, in the database servers. In the network devices, they have very small memory capacity. So if somebody overwrites the logs with anything else, it means that you cannot. But if you spend 1 day to respond, the traffic for 1 day is enough to overwrite the critical evidence you had. And that means that even if you are a magician, you have lost time. So this is speaking to creating capabilities for fast incident response. In our own project Frontline, as we showed you, we received the 58 cases, which we handled through our lab, out of which 61% was outsourced. And the total cost is at 1.9 billion. So what does this mean? This means that some of the cases that are brought for investigations do not necessarily go to maybe Uganda police, because you can see it's very different. And this is the cases we handled. What about the cases that went to the competition or other people which were handled? So that shows you that somehow there is a problem, which is big in the market. So we cannot therefore, of course, somebody's going to say, why is it that in the published reports of companies, we don't see, for example, the cybercrime? Just pardon me, I think the screen is off. I wish you can allow me to share screen. Okay, allow me to share. Have you enabled? Can I share? Okay, so sorry for that. So, so it is very important going forward that capabilities for instant response is very important. So what we are doing for some other organizations, we are doing red teaming, but also we are doing independent real-time threat monitoring. And this means that for the critical network logs, when you implement zero trust, it means that you don't even trust the insiders. With due respect to the IT team and security team, which is inside, it means that you are not trusting the third party. You are doing sort of counter cyber security risk management, so that you have 2 points whereby you can find evidence. If I'm doing real-time collection of your network device logs at critical points, Active Directory, at network level, at endpoint, it means that then I have, if a crime takes place and somebody who has attacked you is trying to cover their tracks, you already have a reference point, because independently we have this information. And ours, because it is real time, you are even able to anticipate and say, this is happening. Somebody is trying to, for example, ping your network, and this is what is happening. And that is very important. I hope you can hear me. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Sorry for that. So I hope you are able to see what I presented. I was just showing that reporting is inconsistent, but also, as you can see, volume of cases also shows as if it is reducing. So from a scientific point of view, we cannot be able to show why cases reported to, say, law enforcement reduce. But this is because somebody could say, one, obviously, people want solutions. Some of the cases, for example, which go to police, maybe are about cyber harassment, cyber bullying, and these kind of cases. And sometimes, for example, it is a standard operating procedure at Summit Consulting. When cases do come, we must report them to the law enforcement, to go to police, because when we're doing digital forensics, the presumption is matters will end up in court. Even if it goes to the disciplinary hearing, it will go to court. So you need to have court admissible evidence. And if I'm going to be, for example, examining somebody's private gadget, it requires a court order and the proper evidence collection. And that's why we report the cases. But we have seen at the front line whereby the exact cost, the clients do not estimate the case. So when they are reporting to the police, they will report a small amount that was directly reflected in the incident. However, when we begin to report an analysis, you find the problem is so huge. Sometimes the problem has been going on for a long period of time. So the police will capture, say, 2 billion, which is the last transaction that was discovered when the crime has been taking on for maybe 3-4 months. And now that final report, nobody goes back to report to police and say, no, when I was opening a police file, I reported this much, but then this problem has done what? Has actually increased. It is not necessary. That's the problem. And I don't think later when the police is doing their case management that they will go now and look at maybe prosecution. Sometimes what I want you to know is that sometimes the evidence is so compelling that the victim accepts the problem and they begin looking at ways of recovery of this money. Because they know when you go to, for example, the anti-corruption court and you're talking about these things, they are not so much interested in some of these things. These are, I have experienced 1 or 2 cases where that has happened, where they are willing to talk and they look at the assets they bought. And sometimes when you do your damage recovery, it becomes okay. I don't know whether Godfrey or Danny, you want to come in or I continue? Just briefly here. So as you can see, obtaining money by false pretense has remained the most prevalent offense over the years. That is 10,000 times in terms of frequency. Forging and uttering false documents, 868. Counterfeiting, cyber crimes. This is as per categorization from the Uganda Police Report. But I want us to now go into our own project frontline hardcore stuff, which is showing you what we are finding at the front line. We are finding that the state of personal safety, as I told you, we analyzed this at 3 levels: national, organization, and individual. We usually say at Summit Consulting that the only patch to human stupidity is aggressive awareness and training. Still, now phishing is becoming so more complicated and sophisticated with the increasing generative artificial intelligence, large learning models, Internet of Things, but also many people are more active on social media because of activism, but also they want to be validated to show their successes. And this means that people are falling prey to a lot of clicking of attachments. You see, when you click on an attachment, you don't know what is taking place in the background. Sometimes we have found that people, they keep saying that, no, VPN is safe. So many people buy VPN or even invest in VPN by getting the free versions. I can assure you, out of the people listening on this call, you'll find that maybe 50% or even more are using free available virtual private networks to access sites that may be, for example, restricted. And you realize that even going into that free virtual private network, you don't know who is the owner, because you're going to be safe as to the seriousness of the provider of that VPN. So your connection may be safe, but is your the vendor of the person who made that app or the VPN safe? What is how are they using their data? How are they monitoring you and your credentials? We see connecting to public Wi-Fi's as one of the biggest challenges for personal safety. This is something which we keep saying. We know when you are doing countrywide, for example, threat intelligence, or you are going to provide the free Wi-Fi at airport. If you travel to international airports, which you say are advanced, they are giving you public Wi-Fi, but they are asking you to put your passport number and your name, or you are putting your national identity number and your name. So meaning that they are positioning you from which country are you coming from, and when you are passing through our airport, what kind of websites are you visiting? So already that is a high-level profiling for your privacy, and most of the time you are going to accept their terms of conditions even without seeing. But remember, when you go into somebody's space, say a home or office, and they have CCTV camera, you are not going to say, now don't record me when you have accepted to be in their space. So once you accept, then it means that some of how this it is so alarming that even people who could be having what we could call as strategically important information for the business, they are not getting, for example, devices with internet connection that is not public. You need to make sure that you keep your networks being private, because the more you're private, the more it becomes very secure. And then, of course, unpatched software is increasing. You find people, they get updates on their mobile phones, they don't update. You'll find somebody is running Android and the phone was last updated maybe a year ago. So every time you are removing, you are having vulnerabilities. We had a case where somebody came and was saying, everything I'm doing, somebody is watching me, people are watching me. And the people thought this person is getting mad, until we ran that phone analysis into our lab, and we were able to find spoofing applications installed, so much that even when you take a picture, somebody also gets a copy. You send an email, somebody gets a copy. You send a WhatsApp, somebody gets a copy. You send a message, somebody gets a copy remotely. And now you can imagine. So the person was so happy that they are validated that actually they are not mad, because these other people were thinking that these are cases for mental care. You can see how life can be very tough. And that's what the possibilities of technology is happening. So we want you to know that you must continuously patch. When you are on iOS, you see a new update, make sure that you patch it up. You are on Android, you see a new, patch it up, because there are those zero-day exploits which the vendor is trying to fix, and nobody's going to come and do it for you. Then, of course, endpoint security. We are talking about zero trust, as we are going to be showing you as we move on. Zero trust, we are looking at the user. Who is the user? Are they validated? Do you know them? Do they have permission to be in your network? You're looking at the devices. What is the device the user is using? Are they using bring your own device and they are connecting it on the network? When at organizational level, you find that the devices cannot be accounted for. And that's some of the things which are very bad, because if you don't make sure that you can exclude unauthorized devices onto your network, that becomes difficult. So meaning that don't allow, even if somebody is your staff, is your director, if their device is not accredited, it shouldn't be accepted on your network, because then you don't know, because you are saying who is the user, what devices are they using, which network are they connecting on. So when I come, even if I'm authorized and I come on your network, am I getting a VIP access everywhere? For example, if I come to your home, the public space is the sitting room or the meeting room. Now, if I'm a visitor, you have just seen me today, are you going to allow me to go into your bedroom, also to go into your store, also to go into your library, also to go into your children's bedrooms? Is that so? Am I going to sleep with a stranger you have seen today, sleep with your children in the same room? Obviously, you're going to say, what if I have one room? Then you have to make sure that you don't sleep. That's what it means. because that's what it means when to say with no endpoint security. So you are looking at the user, the devices they are using. So you remember for the devices, you can only control it on the network using the MAC address. We find that some of these simple inventory, you go to a given company, they are making billions of shillings. You ask them their ICT register software and hardware, they can't account. You're asking them for the users validated and their access rates, they can't explain. So that's what is causing a lot of these problems. And then, of course, once you see the user, their devices, the network they are allowed to access, what applications are going to access into your company? Am I going to access all the applications there? Because if I'm a person in business development or I'm a tailor, what business do I have with the ERP to create or to delete or to print? So you find that the applications I'm accessing should be responsible on best principles need to use. And then finally, which data in that application am I going to be accessing? So zero trust recommends that you trust after controls. So at each point, somebody is validated. I will ask my colleague Dana to come in. You can just come and speak on here. Yes.
Thank you once again. So from that same point, we noticed that as around the turn of COVID, because this is a trend that shows exposure, as we shall explain how deep the methodology in terms of measuring and acquiring this data and how we came to it. But the trend we can notice is that from around 2018, the exposure rate, this is for Uganda specifically, we noticed that the services were all in measurable levels, all levels which are not as high. But at the turn of COVID, you realize that all of these services increased, the least one increasing by 3%. So which means that this is the time when we had a lot of exposure. And then ever since COVID, we haven't had much reduction in terms of the services that are exposed. So what this means is that since the COVID break, we have had an expanded attack surface as a country, which has led to a creation of a lot of vulnerabilities and opportunities for cyber attacks to happen within different organizations. So diving into the ports that we feel are critical because of different reasons. Again, this shall be in depth in the actual final report that you shall access with time. The usage of Telnet. Telnet is a protocol that allows remote access to systems. Most of them are being core systems. As you can see within our Ugandan IP and internet space, we have a lot of exposure. This is a number like too much to expose, and these are average percentages. So in terms of ISPs, we noticed that NITA, which is attached to government, has a lot of exposure in terms of Telnet usage. And the issue or security challenge with Telnet is that Telnet is a clear text protocol. So all the data that is transferred between the nodes that are communicating is in clear text. So anyone in between, either a malicious ISP or anyone who can intercept this traffic, they do have this information in clear text, whether it is credentials, whether it is data transferred, and it's a little bit risky. Then these top 9 and 10 ISPs, including, we can see NITA and Uganda Telecom, which is worrying because they are mostly government affiliated ISPs. So which means that much of our government systems are at risk of being intercepted in terms of communication. So we move to SSH, which is a better version of Telnet. We do again see that NITA is leading. SSH is good. It has more security. It has inbuilt security. Now, but the challenge is that what we have noticed is that the configured SSH still has issues in terms of the credentials are weak. You find that there are quite a lot of systems which have been compromised, and because most of weak credentials. And then some of them are vendor supplied default usernames and passwords, as well as private keys. So having this many number of these two types of protocols which allow remote access is problematic because one, they should be afforded a layer of protection. You shouldn't expose your consoles to the internet. Just if you have to expose them to the internet, they have to be secured by more than just username and password. You add multi-factor authentication, but ideally they are supposed to be behind protected networks like VPNs and only need to know. So this is a worrying trend we are seeing, and it goes along to so many ISPs, and there are so many variations of this because most of them are running versions which have CVEs and vulnerabilities which are critical that lead to direct exposure. So still on the topic of protocols that are plain text, we have noticed a lot of FTP traffic. And as you can see from the trend, we have a challenge with much of the ISPs, and the biggest attack surface we have in our country affects, unfortunately, the government because of the ISPs which are attached to government are unfortunately not doing enough in terms of securing systems by default that they put on the internet. So FTP has quite a lot of issues, main one being it is plain text, that all the data that you transfer, and mind us, this is file transfer. So this deals in terms of transferring files and critical data that's supposed to be used for different use cases. So all of these ISPs, and we shall explain in the methodology, having plain text protocols on the internet is just exposure of too much. You give a lot of opportunity for attackers to have a lot to go after, and there's a lot that is actually happening within that space. So the same goes for sending emails and managing emails. So SMTP is a protocol we see a lot. Again, you can see that NITA, then followed by a grouping of so many other ISPs, as well as MTN. They are quite in the lead of having mail protocol exposed to the internet. So mail protocol is one of those that by default should not be exposed. Why? Because it is abused a lot in terms of sending spam, and then it also damages the reputation of an ISP because of the malicious use cases of SMTP spamming. So the other challenge you notice,
maybe just for SMP is a simple mail transfer protocol, which is used for sending emails from one person to another. Thank you.
So much of the versions we detected in use are all old and unpatched, which goes back to the core issues. We found that there is a lot of unpatched systems within our internet space, which allows us to be more vulnerable and more affected by the day each time. And these systems, the percentage rate of change is not satisfying to see that much of these are still open and vulnerable to attack. Now, those are plain text protocols that we are more worried about. Now, the other class we are worried about is remote access. So now there's a lot of remote access that shouldn't be afforded within our internet space. We have seen an increase in RDP, which is remote desktop, that should not be exposed. The reason why it shouldn't is that this is one of the most initial attack vectors that we've noticed within different investigations, and also the initial attack vectors of mostly ransomware actors around the world. So what happens is that RDP allows most of what we've detected has standard security, which does not include multi-factor authentication. So it's just secured by a username and password. And there's a lot of credentials that have been exposed around the internet that if we only take the country like Uganda, you would find almost millions of credentials of different organizations. So what happens is threat actors collect these usernames and password, they go on and brute force every login panel that allows a username and password. And when they are lucky, in which most cases they end up having remote access. And the worrying part is that if you dig deeper within the data of remote desktop exposure, you find that there are critical organizations stemming from education. As you see, Renew here is the biggest one. Renew is both government and education affiliated. So they help set up connectivity, and their ISP that does help and push in terms of connectivity for education institutions. And then you can also see NITA close. So much of these are critical systems, which are central government systems and critical government organizations that would cause national security issues if these systems keep being exposed to the internet. So then from remote access protocols, we also looked at database systems or systems that store data. Much of the current systems or much of the systems you use from web applications, they have some sort of database backend that stores the data that you interact with. Now, within our country IP space, we see that again now NITA is still the top exposure of critical protocols that shouldn't be on the internet. We see that now there is exposure in terms of databases that shouldn't be exposed. So for example, the key ones we have include MySQL and MSSQL, which are very critical, and this should be behind and should not be exposed to the internet. They should be kept behind VPNs or within internal networks. And this is a very worrying trend to see within the internet space. And lastly, within this section, we noticed that the industries that are more affected in terms of email security, government comes first, that it has, yes, they have basic DMARC security configured, but the DMARC the DMARC conformance policy is not to drop, which is something that we noticed is problematic, because DMARC allows authentication of email sending and to confirm. So this is what protects your emails from spoofing and being, that enables that that came out of the increased level of spoofing emails and business email compromised, as well as fraudsters who are pretending to write as maybe one organization and yet they're not. So the internet security came up with a protocol called DMARC that allows email to be authenticated, and when it is not, it should be reported. So the policy is when an email doesn't meet the DMARC policy of that is set by an organization, there is a policy to drop the email. There is a policy to quarantine it. There is a policy where it is just none. And then there is, I'm forgetting the other one, but those three are critical. Now, most of what we've seen is that however much they have DMARC configured, the policy is none, which means still email just keeps coming through. So it's a worrying trend that it's government and government mostly and education that are affected. Then you have finance and banking coming in close. So I'll hand over to Mustafa to.
Thank you. Let me get another one. I see some questions. You can read us those questions so that we can address them as we move on to the next section. Okay. So do you have any questions? Please feel free to come on and let us know the questions you have. We have done a high-level, thorough assessment. We want you to make decisions that are informed by data and facts. So we are going to look at both external and internal exposures. As you can see, we observed that inadequate internal network configuration and poor patch management comes top. It is among the top three in terms of the biggest challenges that causes breaches to organizations. Then there is poor password management, management of secrets, and insufficient secondary controls. And that's why I spent a lot of time talking about zero trust, because Most of these problems would be addressed by zero trust. And then we have flawed VPN implementation and web security and web application security. Now, when you go back to inadequate network configuration and poor patch management, you would expect that each and every user, for example, first and foremost, for a remote desktop, you disallow dynamic IP addresses. First and foremost, fix the IPs. Then second thing, understand the physical device of the person and make sure that it is pre-approved from your main server in a way that you're going to be asking simple rules. Is this an IP that is from an authorized user? So that is okay. So I don't see, if you have many staff who are using, who need remote access for remote work, we are not saying that you stop it. What we are saying is strengthen your security over those remote connections. So make sure that you give them fixed IPs, no longer to connect with their dynamic mobile phone internet connections. And then once that is fixed, it is going to be a rule. So the server will not, the network device will drop a connection that is outside the range or not whitelisted. Then make sure that there is a MAC address within your network that has to be approved, because if the system comes and you capture that MAC address, and then you check that the MAC address, maybe the user can be required to provide the MAC address every time they connect. You can technically see it. If it is not the one which you expect, then that connection will not go through. So those simple controls will help you. And then when somebody comes in the network, the question is, what is going to be the area of their interest? Why should somebody connect remotely and then they have a VIP access to everything in your network, including high-level production services? At least restrict it, but also give them the time for which they should make that connection. Make sure that you have that control over your connections. And for the patches, these are automatable. Make sure that all users, they don't connect unless they patch up their systems. Yes, Dan.
To add on to what he was saying, we usually, that's termed as just enough administration. So you give time limits on access to critical systems, especially time of day, so that you trust, you verify trust within the actual action that is supposed to be taken. Proceeding from there, poor password management, we've just highlighted from externally. You could see that if an organization has Telnet and plain text protocols primarily exposed, you would assume that they are not serious in most cases about security, because that is one of the first things nowadays, that we have to bake security within the systems. We have to make sure that we build secure systems from the start. Security should not be an afterthought. So most systems nowadays are requiring, and actually other regulations are requiring, multi-factor authentication, and you have other secondary controls that should go hand in hand with just usernames and passwords, especially for critical systems. So this is one of the biggest things we observe within internal networks. And then the other challenge we see is that ever since COVID came, most organizations resorted to giving access remotely to their internal networks, which has caused a lot of problems, because they are opening up their networks to new threats that they have not been aware of. Someone working from home, we've seen cases where there is leaking of credentials in terms of info stealers or deliberate insider collusion, where someone who has remote VPN access is given wide access to internal systems, and then once they are compromised or they deliberately give their system away, it leads to a lot of issues than when they were, let's say, back at office, because different controls apply to the VPN versus to an on-premise employee. Then as a country, as you see in the technical report, we have become so reliant on web applications and other types of applications. And these applications are relying on APIs. So APIs are becoming the common currency of internet communication as we speak. So these include the most affected organizations in this class include the financial institutions, which are actually losing way a lot of money due to application issues related to API abuse and vulnerabilities in that class. So
actually, during our high-level scanning, for some of the fintechs were able to find the API, the entire API. Now you realize that when the API provider is developing the API, they are more concerned about revenue and enabling the ecosystem, and less focus is put in terms of strengthening of security controls within that particular application. Now, when if you find an entire API, there are so many secrets within that API, including business logic. Now imagine on the internet, you scan and find a business logic for a given fintech. Imagine how much you can do. But also in the API, there are so many other secrets that are hidden. And what does this teach us? What this is calling for is there is need to require for security teams to be part of development, so that security is inbuilt. Bringing security as an afterthought on something which is already working and in production is very complicated. And the example I like to give is you are building a bank and you wanted to have a strong room. You buy a house that was meant just for sleeping in by a person. So that house does not have a strong walls. It did not have the initial thought of security as the core for its primary use. And then now you're applying, you're bringing a service that requires security as a priority. And that's what is happening when it comes to that. Yes.
Now moving on to the other common finding we find within internal environments. Most of the assessments we have carried out and our partners, they are primarily within Windows environments. So Windows environments are dominated by Active Directory as the core identity and access management and control system. Now, Active Directory is a beast to secure. It is a very complex technology, and those 4 highlighted top findings they usually give us domain admin within the first or second day of doing the assessment. So these vulnerabilities primarily come due to the lack of security engineering knowledge within the team, whereby these are default enabled, and that means by default most of the environments we have gone to are in a position that it's very easy to collect privileged credentials, either through intercepting and relaying credentials or just looking through file shares because of the SMB issues. Now, the other issues we do find include excessive permissions and then network reachability. As we discussed, most organizations have, in reality or security-wise, their network is a flat network. With just a pair of credentials like domain admin or equivalent, you find that I have access to the entire network from the server area to the workstations and just about everything. And the average time for us within an organization to achieve domain admin or equivalent privileges is usually between 1 to 2 days. And this is alarming because we ideally would love to take more time and find more hard configurations, but the common challenges within those are critical, and these should start to be looked at within organizations. So these are some of the exploits we find within internal environments. As you see, all of them are affecting Windows systems, and most of them as old as 2008. And there are those which are as old as 2021. The technical report has even more alarming vulnerabilities that we find internally within. And this just speaks into the lack of patch management. There is a lot of gaps and discrepancies in how organizations are managing the security of their applications. And this is critical. That's something that is
Yes,
big.
just to say a point, because sometimes you find that there are servers, which are on the network in a production environment, and they buy a new machine, they transfer the application, but they fail to decommission the old server. So some of these vulnerabilities remain running, but the server is still active on the network, and yet you are running a new version. And I think this speaks to what everybody says, cyber hygiene, speaks to IT governance, speaks to change management, speaks to what is the level of your IT governance. And also when it comes to policy for board action, I think at any point when you come in, the first thing you need to do is to see a 360 IT maturity assessment, whereby you are looking not only at a ITIL governance framework, COBIT framework, or ISO 27001, but you are looking at also the technical vulnerabilities we're talking on, because many times we have got the IT auditors just doing basic control assessments at the high level, but then they're not going to interrogate the system from first principles to see what you put in the policies, the documents which have been written, is indeed what is the rule set in your business environment.
Now, continuing again in terms types of the assessment, we also have performed a number of code analysis where we analyze applications which are being built, applications which have already been built, then applications which are mobile and server as well. So the biggest, the top, the ones we see as highlighted on this slide, JavaScript and cross-site scripting issues still top much of the findings we find. These are used to further attacks. They require another factor, like, for example, authenticated way for them to be materialized, but they still cause a lot of issues, and they are on the WASP top 10, which should be addressed by organizations. Then we have application security flaws. These include APIs and anything interaction in between, that the data is shared either in plain text, the lack of enough security consideration in terms of security development of the applications we've noticed. Then we also have poor and misconfigured management of secrets. We find a lot of secrets, API tokens within the code, usernames and passwords, which are hard-coded within mobile applications of critical, and much of these assessments are affecting the two industries, which is government and banking and finance sector, because they're the ones which are leading in terms of developing applications, and also they have the financial muscle to carry out such endeavors. Then the other vulnerabilities we find code injection, which includes SQL injection of critical applications, and you end up just dumping much of the whole database of, let's say, banking accounts or something like that. So these are common, and we actually call on developers and organizations to really think about application security, because it is becoming very, very critical, since much of society right now is relying on almost applications, from orders, managing orders, ordering things online, banking, getting loans, and so many of these other things are all there.
Yes, so we are going to just move quickly because we want time for questions. I see we have 30 minutes to go. So we shall just rush through this. You can always come to HLB or Summit Consulting. You can also watch this later. But also for a more deeper discussion, we usually do board briefings, exclusive, customized to your environment. We can always do that for you to be able to appreciate. We still see human error as a major cause of cyber breaches, lost, stolen, or otherwise hacked devices, because people, they are not practicing basic minimums to keep themselves safe. They are connecting on Wi-Fi even when they know it is insecure. You go to any hotel, you can usually predict that people attending it will connect to the Wi-Fi of that hotel, because they are marketing it as a key selling point. But now, if you are somebody who connects to, you have an application that is high important, an application issued by your company, why should you do that? Because once you are compromised, then you go to your network, you make it infected completely. Of course, unpatched software, because the person in charge of patching is not doing it, and they are not telling the users to patch because they see it as a role, as a problem. Then obviously activity on unsecure network, my colleague took you through telnet and clear text transmission. This is actually common. I don't know whether even the listeners, if you have a given environment and people are communicating within that network, you'll find that the communication is completely insecure. And some of you are trying to elevate customer experience. You are put in the meeting rooms, you have put Wi-Fi. Visitors are coming to connect on that Wi-Fi. Some of them, you don't know their skill level, because if it is that open, then they can begin getting into so many things, clear text of the things which are communicating. And also, when we see that when hackers come, the main first priority to areas of vulnerability to exploit, it is from the customer or client side. So this means that the organizations, if you are a financial institution, you have to invest a lot of time to create awareness to your customers on the basic precautions to do. For example, if somebody is an online customer for the bank, advise them to have maybe transaction limits, say, of 1 million, depending on their habits. Even the system should be able to intelligently predict the customer's transaction behavior, even if it is on current account, and auto-suggest to the customer to set those limits. And then in a month also set the limits. And when you have a notification, for example, for me, all the services I use, I'm going to get a notification to guide me what to do, not the customer to seek for themselves. So we must be able to use the new technologies to auto improve the experience of the customer, but mostly for security. Then, of course, employees on site. That's why we always encourage, when we are doing this, to begin with external penetration testing, black box pen test. Actually, our presence in markets like South Africa, in markets like Kenya, it is because this is a capability-driven business. You are able to demonstrate expertise by not visiting the client. You show what can be done when I'm outside. You find employees have got rich profiles, their emails are there, everything can be easily harvested, and then you are able to demonstrate expertise. But also the employees on site, they are not taking minimum awareness. Still, the old practices of writing passwords, of keeping them simple and small, of saving them on their phone, saving them in clear text on their computer, is still prevalent. People, they have not yet got those vaults of how do you keep passwords secure in a way that it is very understandable. Third-party vendors, and then of course fifth-party supply chain risk is still an area of vulnerability. And this is where third-party certification and accreditation is very important. I think there is that need of, there is recently, we were at a given client, and he was asking, but where is your ISO certificate? And that's why we are saying them, you cannot be evaluating a security service provider maybe by asking an ISO. Why? Because you can easily buy that on the ground. So that's why capability driven. Can somebody do a red teaming? Can somebody probe into your systems? Can they give you technical expertise to demonstrate that they know what they are doing, or they are just going to come and ask for things, look at your policy and procedure, and then write findings, implication, risk, and then recommendation. And then you accept that when they have not interrogated your revenue assurance, for example, from a raw setup where they have independent access and do independent assessment and validate revenue from pricing, product, up until what is expected. Loss of revenue is the biggest breach, obviously, because people are more money motivated. Now, this is very good news because if this was hacktivists, somebody trying to teach you a lesson, I think we wouldn't be having a service running because if that was the motivation, that is very deadly. Since almost the state of cybersecurity is poor. So it is good that we know people are looking for money, and therefore you can invest to manage that risk. Lack of funding is obviously one of the main reasons which is given. Usually this has always been the issue where way back when you get a chance to talk with the leaders, you are telling them still people are having a lot of physical security. There is a guards, they are a stronger room. But then at any point in time, you find the money which is in those strong rooms is not more than 3 billion, 5 billion. But the money on your core systems is more than your entire portfolio. You have more than 60, 50 billion. So why can't you even use the principle of proportion and put adequate security? 10% of your total portfolio, it is a very good way to do it. And now the trend which you are saying, because of zero trust, you need to have independent ongoing assessment. We have seen ourselves without even trying to maybe make a pitch, where we have independent log backup on our own site where even IT cannot find them. Incidents of fraud reduce completely because everybody knows that there is a second point of truth where when it comes to network logs, when it comes to database logs, we are going to find them and tell you what happens. There is nothing as very painful to experience a cyber breach and then you don't know how they did it. So when we come in as forensics, we have to answer certain answers. What happened? How did it happen? Where did it happen? How it happened? Now, mostly of the time, the how is very complicated in the environment because somehow the tracks have been covered. But with a hybrid security approach, where you have independent team for threat intelligence and ongoing incident response, you really make yourself safe. And this makes business sense. You can look at your own investments and how much, when a breach happens, how much time do you waste? Potential leadership questions of the capability to manage the institution, and then you're able to see. I don't know whether you want to come in or we just hash it up so that we can open for questions. As we said, we are available for a custom inboard session that is customized to your business so that you are able to get more actionable insights. It is not necessary to come and find a 300-page book of ICT policies and procedures, and yet the things which affect you are not even covered. For example, currently we have been reviewing some ICT policies and procedures. You find generative AI is nowhere. There is no section for generative AI. Yet that is the biggest thing. Remote work, it is there, but not on security precautions. And zero trust is missing. So people are talking about it on one side, but the policies are still reading in 2000s. And now that is one of the biggest challenges. So we find effective security processes for responsible employee, cyber behavior, conduct regular employee education and security training. This is ongoing. Sometimes what is happening is you have trained your core team very well, then they move on. Then now when the new people come, they are coming from a different background, culture for cybersecurity. So you need to retrain. Now, sometimes the policy for onboarding with seriousness cybersecurity is not there. So this means that we need to change the policy for onboarding so that it is part of the onboarding process. This means that HR has to come on board and everybody has to come on board. Then, of course, enforce information security policies for employees. Enforcing is different from having the policy. For example, you are not going to access a given resource on your laptop to work. Say, I'm not going to open Microsoft Word unless I confirm I have read the ICT policy and I have updated the most recent patch which IT released, and that is shows on my desktop. So that's what it means by enforcing. You make a technologically led compliance other than a manual where somebody has to come and move in office and say, let me touch your computer. By the way, it is not good for allowing a third party, even if it is the IT themselves, to come and do basic housekeeping for your patches on your machine. It is not their work. That is the user responsibility. And you need to make sure that you don't allow them, because when they come, you don't know what they are going to live with on your machine because they inserted something to it. And that's why this is very important to make sure that processes that are technical led other than people led. You want to add something? Okay, yes. So let me stop sharing so that we can give you some, my colleague will share. Thank you. Thank you very much. Please make sure that there is an option for chat and Q&A. We would appreciate you put the questions in the Q&A, then we can see them quickly. We are going to be opening for the public to answer those questions. Thank you.
So to finalize and the way forward.
Section 4. I think we can go to final, then we shall have the 4, we shall share it with the people.
To finalize and the way forward is so to finalize and the way forward, one, continuously as an organization, as a takeaway from this, any organization should continuously search for what we'd call shadow IT, because shadow IT is IT that you run as an organization, but is not controlled by your central IT teams and policies. So we see this a lot. So this includes exposure through third parties. Some organizations we found, they have an open attack surfaces that they are not even aware about, but it's through their vendors or a team that has provided a software as a service or a platform as a service has exposed something that you are not aware of. Then closing unnecessary remote access spots, things to do, the ones we discussed, the consoles, remote desktop should not be on the internet, telnet should not be on the internet, especially if it is attached to your organization. And then threat intelligence, we're a reliable partner for that. We've invested research and time. We have a head start that we can provide threat intelligence about threats happening in your organization and any of the fields that are attached. So the future of cybersecurity is 2 ways. One is called continuous threat exposure management. We at Ishield, and the whole idea behind Ishield and the offering is that you have a continuous assessment, ongoing 360. That means every day or every scheduled time. It can be per day, per hour, per week. We monitor the exposure as we said in the beginning, at the national level, at industry level. We can go deep to given organizations which are critical, the ones which are like national critical. Then we collect that information and create an informed picture of the varying threat landscape that any organization is facing. Then also, zero trust is being baked into much of the security. For the organizations that have cloud integrations, they understand that the cloud has inbuilt zero trust tenants by default. Things like identity, the core identity and access management, network visibility and continuous monitoring and such capabilities. So that is what the way forward. So you can contact us and ask us where you can get a free outlook of your organization. You can contact us and we can tell you how deep your organization is looking. And I think this is where we end it, and we go into the question and answers.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me open the questions and you can show them what they want. So if you have any question, please raise up your hands.
The first question I want to look at, there is someone who asked, how are we measuring and how do we proceed to measure this data? So I'm going to share a methodology, especially at the national level, that we use to measure. So the internet is composed of what are called, we usually call them ISPs, but technically they are called autonomous systems. So they utilize a protocol that's called BGP, Border Gateway Protocol. So what happens is that each country has assigned autonomous systems and they have different numbers. The ones that you can see on the screen, allow me to just highlight that. So these numbers you see here, they are called autonomous systems and they are assigned to ISPs, I think.
It's okay. I think we can hear. Yes, continue.
So those autonomous systems are assigned to organizations. For example, MTN is an ISP. You have Airtel, the ones that you know, but there are those which you rarely know. For example, C Squared, those which you don't know, like Somba, something like that. So these organizations, they are the ones who run the backbone of the internet. Now, the highest ranked ISP in the country is MTN, because they have a lot of things that they are there, then followed by, they have, the reason why they're highest ranked, they have, if we go and check it out, they have a lot, they have like what are called upstream, they have a lot of downstream systems or ISPs that receive internet that is coming from internet that is managed by MTN. So there is that measure of that. So each ISP has what are called prefixes. So these prefixes are the IP address spaces that each ISP is managing and runs. So our methodology, we start with all the ISPs. You see, we have, I think, around a total of around 30 total in the country. Then for each ISP, we pick the IP address in that range. Now, for each IP address, we have systems that do carry out sensors, and they map the operating system, the open ports, and all of that information, as well as linking it with the CVE data that is attached to any system that is exposed. So from that information, we get a very rich data set to give you an informed decision of how our landscape in terms of exposure is looking.
So let me look at another question just to make sure that.
I hope that answers the question that was there.
So they are saying, does storing data in an OTP in a database or in the variable in plain text in wait for comparison with user supplied OTP value expose system to attack?
To answer Benaldi's question, storing any form of sensitive data anywhere, be it database encrypted in some way or another, even if it is not, it should be at least encoded so that they are not stored in plain as they are. The programming language is different depending on how the programming language, the frameworks used, determines what it can afford you enough flexibility in terms of libraries that either decode and encode the data, and you can compare with the one that is encoded in the database. So if you store this in plain text data, it is very horrible, bad programming experience. Please don't do it. It will expose your user base to attacks that include even your administrators or the backend administrators can see this data as it is, and it can be abused. We've been to organizations where this has been abused to varying levels. So to answer Ronald Ojilong's question about artificial intelligence being adopted across various sectors in Uganda. So first, we've hardly seen the adoption of artificial intelligence. What we have noticed is that, yes, there are products all around, the products that are being deployed, or the applications, they contain an element of what we call machine learning. Artificial intelligence is the broad term that covers everything in the field of making machines learn and understand the data that it is. Now, what we've seen is that there is an increase in use of machine learning models. For example, in banking, banking uses a lot of fraud detection, from credit card, to detect credit card fraud, to detect any loan frauds. They use a lot of models that look at different data, like is a person, how is the person's credit score and all of this information. So these systems are models that are mathematically built to make sure that they enhance the human reasoning. They themselves do not contain the logic that is, that is the threat as seen here. But what we've seen that they have not yet been fully adopted past their domain of use. So you find that banking has different domains, and the data that they have, because machine learning and artificial intelligence are data hungry fields. They require a lot of data to be effective. So we haven't, yeah. So the AI is still some distance to be commonplace, except the users who are using these publicly available LLMs and large language models. We haven't seen them much in the enterprise scale. And then within 5 to 10 years, well, it still takes time to adopt. The people who are even building these systems in the first place are also still learning. So there's a lot of gaps, and we would just say that you just need to keep an eye on it. There's still a lot to look through in terms of artificial intelligence. What we use it for, as we've explained to you, there's a lot of data, and security has become a data area, a data problem. So you have a lot of packets that are moving between your networks, and you have a lot of logs that are in your environment. So you have only a team of 1 or 2 people who are doing security in your organization. So what happens is that machine learning models allow you to look at this data faster, and you have insights faster than a normal 2-team people would do. So it enhances how your team is performing. And that's the trend we are seeing that is being taken. I hope that answers the question. So to answer that, we actually it is the biggest challenge where it falls in the class of privileged access management. So yes, Philip, you should always use your non-privileged account to log in to do your daily work, like reading your emails and browsing files and whatnot, and also browsing the internet. The reason is that if you use a privileged account and somehow mistakenly you get compromised, you're going to leak the privileged credentials and access directly. So you should have 2 accounts, one for your administrative role and the daily use account that you use. So that is the required and standard industry practice.
Thank you. Let us go. We shall be available. Thank you very much. Okay, so please, our chief guest, unmute and speak to us. We shall be available for any other questions, but we see the questions are almost finished. Thank you. Thank you very much for listening to us, and we recommend that you share this presentation on our socials to your colleagues. It is a data-driven presentation, and it gives direct policy input. Thank you. So over to our partner to tell us, to invite our chief guest. Doctor.
That means I need to come there, maybe?
Yes, he's already on, no problems. Okay.
Okay.
You can do here.
Sorry. Okay.
Yes,
I hope,
Mr.
yes,
Mugerwa,
Mr.
you can talk to the participants.
Yeah. Good afternoon, and
Your volume
thank
is
you very
very low,
much.
I think. Okay.
Good
All right,
afternoon.
thank
Can
you.
you hear me now?
Yes, it's okay. Thank you. It's better there. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon once again, and it's such an honor to serve as your chief guest today. The Ishield 360 cybersecurity report is certainly a very big milestone in our collective journey as we work towards a more secure and resilient digital landscape. There are a number of issues that have been highlighted, and I'm grateful to the presenters, Mustafa, Godfrey, and the rest of my fellow panelists that have highlighted a number of takeaways that I think the business leaders on call can possibly run with. It highlights the dire state we are in, not just as a country, Uganda, but also as a region, and at wider scale, certainly the African continent and the globe at large. From the financial and banking sector, certainly those on call from the sector, just like myself from that sector, you will notice that the report has given us a wake-up call if you are not already alert and aware of what the sector is facing. For obvious reasons, this is a sector that is naturally more liquid, and therefore it attracts a lot of interest from cyber criminals, because, I mean, it's the easy one to liquidate, to sort of turn your loot into liquid very quickly. It may not be as easy to do so in another sector, let's say the telecom sector, but here you get your hands on that vault, whether it's a digital vault or otherwise. You're already rich, you already have the money. You don't have to convert it, you already have it. Now, if you look at the studies and the work of Summit, as well as its partners, Jim Roberts, you will find that the number of threats that the financial sector alone is facing is more than half what the other sectors are having to deal with. For instance, we are looking at a figure of over 50% in the affecting the financial sector. Then if you go into the healthcare sector, the telecommunication sector, we've seen the exposures that are ably visible from the report. You see that 20% of the healthcare sector is affected, 15% the telecommunication sector is affected with vulnerabilities. And since we are consumers of the services of these sectors, sometimes their vulnerabilities may not translate into impact, into financial impact, or maybe a service outage, but we, its clients, especially the telecom sector, end up being the victims. So that's why you find that this sort of highlights the fact that we are connected and we suffer together. Even if the sector, the telecom sector, may not feel the pinch that, for instance, the banking and financial sector is facing, they still need to deal with the vulnerabilities that this report highlights in order to safeguard not just the telecom sector, but certainly the clients that they serve with connectivity. I wanted to highlight a few things. I've taken some notes. I've had the privilege of looking at this report, and I wanted to highlight some of the key issues that stand out. The aspect of human error stands out. The human aspect in the war against cyber security has been very, very much emphasized. You will note that, for instance, social engineering attacks like phishing, which exploit human trust and curiosity, lead to almost 90 to 99% of all successful cyber attacks. Your staff, your employees will compromise security by doing very basic and simple things, sharing passwords, leaving these passwords unattended to, writing them on cheats, leaving computers unattended, falling prey to deceptive emails. These all eventually can, turn out to be a devastating cyber attack. The report also has highlighted the technological approaches and emphasized the human-centric approaches to confronting cyber risk. The human-centric approaches employ such methods like, for instance, cybersecurity awareness and training. We need to equip our employees, we need to equip our staff so that they know what to do when, for instance, they are faced with a phishing email. How do they identify it and know that this is a phishing email? They need to be equipped, they need to be trained. So it's important that as we roll out all these nice technology approaches to confronting cyber risk, we integrate the human behavioral aspects into our cybersecurity strategies. Now, as one of the aspects one of the agenda items today is to do with collaboration. Collaboration in dealing and confronting cyber risk is a very important aspect. And this is a collaboration that will include private sector players, cybersecurity experts amongst themselves, industries within themselves, and across industries. Within the financial sector, for instance, the Uganda Bankers Association has been at the forefront of promoting collaboration within the banks and other financial sector players. But also, you have noted that the telecommunication sector is exposed. There are a couple of vulnerabilities that have been identified. It then calls that for us to also collaborate with sectors other than our own. What about the regulators? What role should the regulators play? What is the role of Bank of Uganda? Well, the regulator should help the various sectors that they regulate by coming up with some sort of basic standards so that players know what they need to do at a basic level in order to address cyber risk. Cyber risk is now considered one of the major disasters globally. I think you will recall recently, I think it was probably, was it 17th or somewhere 21st July, the issue of CrowdStrike, whereby in that one of the engineers who worked on a patch released it probably before it was fully tested. And the whole Western world was affected. A significant portion of that was affected. Costs ran into billions in just a matter of weeks. You can see how important for us to work together and collaborate and come up with those minimum standards. For instance, it's a well-known fact that banks, generally, if you're a banker and you're an IT, you do not roll out patches as soon as they come. You wait, you test until you're satisfied that what you're trying to fix and what you're using to fix it will not eventually become a problem. And that's what happened with CrowdStrike. They just quickly rolled out something without having it fully tested. So awareness is a very important aspect. What about the policy aspect? As those aspects came out clearly, internal policy, as well as national policies that
Edward.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back. Thank you.
Can you hear me? I got a disconnection.
Yes, you're back on. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to highlight just a few things as I wind up. I know that our time is fast spent. Well, I just wanted to, let me issue this call as we wind up. For the leaders on this call, this report is a strategic guide on why cybersecurity investments are no longer optional. They are essential, they're existential. They are basically your company, your business could close just by having one cyber incident that goes through successfully. By one successful cyber attack, you could actually go under. So cybersecurity investments are no longer a luxury, they are existential. For CIOs, IT managers, and cybersecurity professionals, this report will offer you insight into the latest threats and the solutions. Risk and compliance officers, you will find valuable information on regulatory requirements as well as risk management strategies. If you are from the SME, you're also not spared. You need this report. It provides practical, cost-effective measures to protect your business. As I conclude, for me, it's a call to you all, celebrated and esteemed participants on this call, that the Ishield 360 Project Frontline 2024 report is a must read. It's a must read for anyone committing to safeguarding our digital future. With these few remarks, I would like to declare the Ishield 360 Project Frontline report launched. And as we wind up on that, today we also formally launch the partnership between HLB Jim Roberts and Summit Consulting by signing an MOU. I don't know if Dr. Nyoin, you have already signed or you are about to sign the report.
We signed it at the beginning.
MOU, I certainly missed that.
Yes, we signed the MOU at the beginning of the event, so it is okay. They're already signed.
Already signed. Yes, that's wonderful. And really, for me, I would like to encourage others on call to explore opportunities to partner. Cybersecurity is about partnerships. It's about sharing and exchanging information. You cannot confront successfully the cybersecurity war if you are working in isolation, simply because the issues that affect one business are probably the same that are going to affect another business. So if one business has been affected, you probably need to know that and safeguard your own institution from falling prey to the same sort of tactics. So this collaboration that has been, an MOU has been signed today, and we are formally here to witness its launching. It's a step in the right direction. And though I am not physically there to touch that MOU that has been signed, I take the honor to declare this partnership launched. With those few words, I thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you can close the session.
Yeah, close the session.
So with this, thank you very much. And we shall end our broadcast now. Thank you, Edward, and everybody on this call. We hope you have enjoyed. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you very much.